very sitcom-like.
It does, yes, yes.
Way more fun than it looks.
So good morning.
Good morning.
I would love for you to start off by talking a little bit about what you are most curious and passionate about.
Hello, Frank. Hello, Katie. So I am deeply passionate about social justice. My entire career has been spent at the intersection of media and communication and social justice, and I love our field. So that's the first way that I would start this. But I think probably the origin story of my interest in all of that and where I find myself today is that I'm a little bit of an impatient optimist. So I am voracious about needing more and more ways to understand how we're engaged by culture and creativity and storytelling and communication for good. And so over the course of my career, one of my first jobs out of graduate school, and I was trained, of course, as a researcher in graduate school, and so research has been a part of all of my work. But my first job was to work with entertainment producers and writers at shows on MTV and BET around HIV awareness and testing, and then to do public health research to find out how they are changed in some way or motivated after watching those. I went to work for Norman Lear, the legendary, Google him later, not now, the legendary TV producer who really was this guy who sort of put on the map the idea that you could talk about social issues through comedy. I produced social justice activist documentaries, did activist campaigns around them, and then years later, I was a senior executive at a communications agency doing behavior change communication. So the reason I tell you all of that is to say what I learned in all of those arenas is that any one of those is not sufficient for this work. They actually all need one another. So the tight message and research control of behavior change communication, for example, really needs culture and creativity and light and optimism. So now I direct a center, an academic center and innovation lab called the Center for Media and Social Impact, and we do all of those things at once. So my driving research questions and everything that we do are related to how can we learn more about the role of creativity and storytelling and sort of deviant art and how that works for social change. And so all of our research work, even the peer-reviewed stuff, is designed for this kind of community. So it's designed for people to put it into practice.
Awesome. I noticed in your research that comedy is the through line in so much of your current work. Why comedy? I guess a couple of different origin stories or moments of discovery. So as mentioned, I work for the legendary Norman Lear, and there are a lot of stories I could share about him, but there was this one time in Chicago. This is what I do in class. I'm like, oh, I just remembered there's that one time I should tell you about. So we were in Chicago on a business trip, and he wears this sort of trademark hat. It's this white hat, and he's kind of known for it. He's a famous guy, but he's not famous visibly, if that makes sense. He's going to be horrified when he sees this, that I just said that. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm legitimately famous. So there was a tour bus going by, and they stopped, and they said, well, that's Norman Lear. We're in Chicago. What are you talking about? So the tour bus parks and gets out, and people wanted to get off this bus and talk about how much his comedy had meant to them. His comedy was 30 years ago, about how much the representation meant to them, how much it added light and humanity into issues and really encouraged people to talk. And I thought that was incredibly powerful, and we did some comedy work together. And then years later, I was producing a documentary series, a sort of very earnest traditional series about global poverty, and I'm not sure who watched it. By the way, I love documentaries, but so I thought we should be challenging ourselves to find new ways to communicate about social justice issues, and comedy is such a deviant art form that allows us to both see things as a source of civic imagination, but also to use social critique. So that seemed right to me. Awesome.
So yeah, great. Comedy.
So as part of the Frank prize competition, you submitted a paper. Can you tell us a little bit more about your paper, what you explored, and then how it adds to your research interests?
Sure, yeah. So the article has a little backstory. So I produced a documentary in 2014 with Hassan Minhaj, who's now on, he has his own show on Netflix.
and this was like before that. And it was a global poverty documentary called Stand Up Planet. We released it globally and in the United States in 2014, and then conducted experimental design research to find out what happens when people experience those things through comedy. And we learned a whole lot, and so I realized in that, as I was doing the literature review to write the paper, there wasn't enough research for my taste that was really looking at comedy and social justice in a more expansive way, not necessarily talking about public health, which is part of social justice, of course, and not necessarily just talking about sort of civic and voting behaviors, but the sort of big expanse of social justice is really about the ebb and flow of public opinion and norms and how we feel about people. So I launched an initiative called the Laughter Effect, which is a research and creative initiative, and we have a lot of research projects that look at these questions. So as part of that work, this paper came to be. My colleague Lauren Feldman and I wrote this paper, and so we wanted to know, if we look at the worst humanitarian crisis of our era, which is the Syrian refugee crisis, can comedy be employed to help humanize that issue and help to shift public opinion that is actually meaningful when we think about supportive public policies and refugee resettlement and a number of other policies? So we did experimental design research. You all will hear about it tomorrow, so I don't want to totally reveal everything. But so we looked at news viewers and comedy viewers in an experimental design context, and we found, spoiler alert, the comedy was more impactful when you think about issues of empathy and shifts on public opinion with supportive public policy.
Got it. All right, well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it tomorrow. How does this add to our understanding of how organizations should think about their communication strategies?
Yeah, so a big fancy thing that we learned was that, you'll hear more about it tomorrow, this is real hard to not reveal it all, so one thing that we learned is that entertainment value was the most important persuasive aspect of the comedy. Now, it's actually a fairly significant theoretical contribution, because a lot of research around comedy is looking almost exclusively at other sort of traditional means of persuasion, so message discounting, argument strength, and so on. So entertainment value is really important. So here's why this matters, communicators. It matters because if the comedy is not really funny, it's not doing anything. Yes. It's not persuasive. So it's not message strategy. It's entertainment and creativity. It needs to be free in order to be great. So that is an evidence-based idea, and also something that should feel fairly intuitive for you all that create cultural strategy. The other thing that's important to mention is that if we're worried about so-called message discounting, which I'll talk about tomorrow, not taking something seriously because it comes through comedy. There is other research from a different scholar named Robin Navi that shows that when we get people attracted through comedy, and the comedy is really fun and entertaining and therefore persuasive, if there is any message discounting, you can add the call to action later, which is a restoration of gravity. Remind them that this is truly a devastating issue, and here's what needs to be done. And the most important point that I want to say to this group in particular is if social justice communication people want to work with comedy, you need to collaborate with professional comedy people. So I call this don't make conference room comedy. And so what I mean by that, I have been in those meetings. Like you look around and someone goes, what should we do about the malaria campaign? And someone goes like, Joe is so funny. He's our funniest colleague. He can do it. Joe's not a comedy writer. He can't do it. Yeah. So comedy is in all of us, so I think that we think that we can just do it, but no, comedy writing happens through practice and rehearsal. So I was on, quick story, I was Henry Jenkins, the legendary, amazing scholar. Everybody should read all of his books. He was interviewing me for his podcast on this topic, and I brought up my conference room comedy thing, which is amusing to me because I feel like I've been that person too. I'm like, I can write the comedy. That's not true. So I said this line about conference room comedy, and he gets a little twinkle in his eye, and he goes, wait. I can't even say this. It makes me laugh every time. He goes, wait. So what you're saying is... It's not even that funny. Because what you're saying is mansplaining and bad dad jokes don't foster social change. I said, oh my God, you're so smart. That's what I mean. Yeah. No, but that's true, right? Yeah. Mansplaining bad jokes. Sorry, man. So anyway, my friend Kelly Leonard at Second City calls this practicing comedy without a license. Don't do it, but collaborate with comedians. And then in your next question, I'm going to give you a way to do that.
Okay, next question. So what's next with the comedy and social justice work?
Well, a book is next.
Okay.
So actually, Lauren Feldman and I wrote this book. We were the collaborators on this project, and we actually just finished editing the last chapter on Monday.
Great.
So it goes to the publisher in 2 weeks. And so it's called A Comedian and an Activist Walk into a Bar, the serious role of comedy and social justice. You all should think that's a funny title.
It is funny.
Funny for peer review.
Yeah.
That's fucking hilarious.
It is.
It's like the funniest thing that ever happened to the publisher. So there's a book coming out in 2020, and it's really, an important thing that I want to say here is that this particular study is about audience research, but this is not the only way to be looking at comedy. And our book is about comedy as civic practice. It's really the stories. It is about how comedy works as persuasion, audience effects, of course, but it's deeply about the stories of collaborators who work together. And also, my center has created, along with a collaborator named Mick Moore, who's a great comedy strategist, political strategist, we've created a lab called the Yes and Laughter Lab, y'all. And that's a bad dad joke. And so that is, Comedy Central is a partner. They just came on board. And what we'll be doing is incubating real comedy with real social justice leaders so that we have more of this work to be out in the world, more to research, more social change to happen. So that's what we're up to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.